government. The government's primary obligation is to ensure freedom of its people and provide basic public goods to satisfy basic needs. Because this is democracy, people have a legal obligation to give back and participate in government where we determine the rights to occur in an ideal democratic society. Compulsory obligations increase the importance of the obligation. Thus, the criterion is to increase critical citizenship, to fulfill the proper obligation of citizens and place checks on the government to encourage a just democracy. Critical citizenship occurs when people are exposed to up close with the government and national service. This forces them to consider how policy affects the people around them and sensitizes them to social injustice. Volunteers experience radicalization. This includes identify political oppression in a critical sense that makes them apt to making change. Thus, the advocacy is to make national service compulsory in the United States for 2 years for 18 to 25-year-olds. We will give people a choice of military service or any other type of national service they choose. Contention 1, there's an individual duty from the right to vote and participate in one's country. This stems from the right to self-determine to a certain extent within the democracy. Separate side. The key role is citizens' participation in the public life. Citizens have the obligation to become informed about public issues and scrutinize. All citizens are equal under the law. No one can be discriminated against. Furthermore, people have the right to question the decisions of the government. They ought not reject governmental authority. And national service fosters critical citizenship, which increases civic participation and understanding. Key to challenging oppressive policies. In the status quo, critical citizenship is lacking. Basso 4. Youth are not uniformly politically uninvolved. At times, youth are engaged in often contentious political activity, fulfilling our nation's need for critical as well as compliant citizens. Young activists use their rights to protect and fight for the rights, but checking and directing the state use of power. National service gives participants an in-depth, close-up experience with the government through programs itself and through the contract. Participants sensitize them to social injustice, demonstrate that the social problems are rooted in individual action, support advocacy, allow for encouraging participants to press for new government policies and challenge existing ones as part of their service. And critical citizenship is historically fostered in volunteer service for America. Basso 4. VISTA project's evaluation showed that 23% displayed evidence of conflict with local decision makers and controversy within the community. Some of these projects were highly effective. VISTA experience did radicalize volunteers. The experience volunteers identified contributing to the beliefs included observed economic and political oppression, corruption at the local and federal level, more politically aware of social and political injustice, and the need for political action. Learned how the national power structure is an obstacle to the solution of poverty. Volunteers were critics of the current social scene, and this critical sense had been heightened by the time visitors returned to their own communities. They were quick to spot inequality and flaws and quick to do something about it. And AmeriCorps also fosters critical citizenship, but compulsory service is needed to make it more effective. Basso 4. AmeriCorps addresses the most challenging public problems to ensure that all children receive a good education. Neighborhoods everywhere are safe, and future generations inherit a livable environment. AmeriCorps can foster critical citizenship by making sure that its members understand the larger public issues underlying the problems which they are working. It will require a commitment to getting a wider diversity of people. AmeriCorps staff, decision makers, and local administrators, enrollees, and others to start speaking the language of citizenship. And contention 2 is equality and representation. Currently, lower income and minorities are disproportionately driven into the military, which increases casualties. IB 14. Armed forces remain unrepresented in the civilian society. Minorities remain overrepresented. The promise of individual freedom has been broken. Congress set military status at the minimum to give would-be draftees to leave the civilian workforce and enter the military. This created an environment in which lower income individuals were most likely to enlist. Labor-driven volunteer militaries contribute to higher casualties. Government leaders place more troops in harm's way, but only a small percentage of the population participates. Those who have the least in our society are often to risk all for the very thing they have been denied, a job. Some say that these control mechanisms would have prevented the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq. And the AF means that the nature of service is less race than the one that targets minorities. The best way to solve the current disproportionate representation in the military is through national service system. Hallman 07. The best alternative system of recruitment is national service. It would help to deconstruct social stratification based on economic, racial, and ethnic lines. Such service builds civic values, boosts the needed services, and provides function as a social equalizer. The approach would enable teams from a variety of backgrounds and regions to form connections, leading to a more unified national identity. The disproportionate representation of low-income persons in the military suggests that military targets these recruits. Contention 3 is that national service is key to combating oppressive policymaking. First, national service can help bridge divided communities by acting as a sociological mixer that breaks down the us-them mentality. It's Nazi. The program could serve as a great sociological mixer of American needs. National service is designed to enable people from different backgrounds, sociological backgrounds, to work and live together, and could be an effective way for boys, girls, whites, non-whites, north, south to get to know each other as equals. And when national service bridges the divide, it forces the individual to confront the other side and consider the implications of people other than yourself. This is key to good policy making and a functional democracy. This empathy is crucial for moral policy making. And empathy creates better policies, avoiding things like the war on drugs. Talents 11. In the case of the drug use, greater empathy led to greater willingness to help the drug users. The class empathy aids in youthful deliberation, but deliberation can promote empathy. This gives indirect evidence that empathizing may importantly influence the way people approach conflict situations. The dehumanization of the poor and marginalization of racial groups linked with criminality, such groups have inadequate political representation and power. There are no structural safeguards against a war on drugs, which ends up being a war on an entire racial socioeconomic group.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
The plan text, what does it mean other national service groups? Do you mean AmeriCorps?
It means like AmeriCorps, Vista, Peace Corps. Those that are like.
So you defend the entire topic.
Yeah, it's full res.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about the sort of framework warrants. Just because the U.S. is a democracy, why does it have the obligation to act like what people theorize democracies to act as?
Okay, so since I'm talking about the social contract, we entered into this like social contract with the government, and this government is a democracy, so that's where the right to trade has to occur.
Okay, so what part of the card talks about how the U.S. specifically is a democracy, or the U.S. specifically has a social contract?
This is like, well, first of all, we like are going.
Why ought the government act in this way? Like, what part of this is contextualized to the way the U.S. government is?
Okay, so the government ought to act in this way in order to first ensure the rights of the people, and then also.
Why is that important?
It's important to ensure the rights of the people, so like people aren't oppressed.
So oppression is relevant under your framework.
Yeah, I'd say it's relevant.
Okay, but that seems to rely on some sort of external moral philosophy to know oppression is bad. Why is it bad under your framework? What part of the framework justifies that?
Okay, so in the fact that I am advocating for critical citizenship to place checks on the on a government to encourage a just democracy, that's so that like oppressive policies aren't being made.
So what constitutes justice? Like you've like isolated oppression, which relies on some external moral framework. So where does that justify within the framework?
Okay, so I'd say that it is a state's obligation to not oppress their citizens. That comes out of the social contract. The government cannot oppress their citizens.
Who determines what the state has an obligation to do, or like who sort of mediates these programs? Like how do they set ends for themselves?
Well, I'd say that you could look to like the social contract in that when you you consent.
Okay, you keep
to
referencing like the abstract concept of a social contract, but what holds a government sort of accountable for certain ideals? Like your whole framework is
right. Okay, so I'd say that we need more accountability for the government. That's fostered through critical citizenship, like encouraging critical citizenship among the citizens. That is what.
So this is so you're like. There's like some sort of like critical citizenship, but the way people get that is through a government program or the government's military, correct?
Okay, so you can try to make that argument, but it's pretty clear in the first contention
it's
about
a yes
how
or no
these
question.
service
It's
groups.
a yes or no question.
Well, the
is
U.S.
it through
government would be
programs?
mandating it.
Yeah, it's so who
AmeriCorps?
runs the military, who runs AmeriCorps / the CNCS? Who runs those?
They would be considered government programs, but that does not negate the fact that that does not negate the consequences of volunteering.
Why does it break down an us-them mentality?
Okay, so this is explained in the third contention whenever it's talking about empathy, whenever it forces you to like confront the other side of a situation and like consider policies that don't just affect yourselves. It breaks down in the us-them mentality, especially when you're like forced to serve with people that you may not like usually serve with.
Okay, I'm setting it up just to say that. Sense. Let me know when you get it. I'm just closing tabs.
Do what?
Let me know when you get it.
I got it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. The order will be one off case. Everyone good. Conceptions of citizenship necessitate non-citizens and people who don't have access to the Act conception of rights. Fletcher 15 states that rely on some citizenship and class relationship who meets the projection of oppressive social contract that structurally unemployed among the whites, African Americans, Native Americans, and non-immigrant Latinos, and they just have formal rights but live on the margins of society. Their political rights are meaningless. Migrants exist in the shadow border, neither seen nor heard, but fulfilling functions of the capitalist state needs to be done in neoliberal capital needs them sub-citizen category. has sold community service to highest bidder corporations controlled in the non-profit industry, even the most new, most liberal organizations provide technocratic top-down management that kills radicalism and guarantees inequality. Manzala Spade 08. The effective non-profit model and the movements that fund extremes that are focused on either overtly political work or direct service work, and services are depoliticized, offering little opportunity for communities experiencing oppression to build networking relations with services are provided through social work model that individualizes the issues, and the element of moralizing the cast of citizens or the clients as blameworthy for their need, and services are part of maintaining the social order because they primarily operate by through depoliticizing a charity framework. The governance structure of nonprofits characterized by boards consisting of donors and elite professionals perpetuates dynamics of dominance of priorities and implementation to reflect the perspective funder-driven elitism. That also concluded a professionalization of social justice that corporate business models are used to manage these organizations. Business models and management focus on top-down decision-making coupled with organizational structures in which educational race and class privilege correspond with higher positions in decision-making, compensation, and quality of life are concentrated in the hands of white people, and mandatory services just workfare in disguise that channels public money into ineffective neoliberal organizations that try to make the poor people earn their worth. This is ineffective and proud society for further privatization. Mohan 94. It is one thing to ask college students whose president of employment remains bright to serve. It is quite another to insist that those through circumstances learn to be beyond the order control have the prospect of employment and acceptance and greater discipline and receive benefit. Service is essentially what take community service. Our community works. Students are more likely to present service advocates of service depoliticized issues by asserting that their view to service as a means of coping with social problems by removing the civic and political concerns with the idea of public deliberation, creating a revived public release of profound material inequalities and tensions, social inequalities, tensions which provoke calls for national service will make candidates for higher education for minority groups intention themselves for further period raising the stakes high, and it is significant that a trade-off and critique outweighs neoliberalism because of global inequality and planetary extinction. Only reinvestment in the collective good can solve. Gillespie 819. Overfishing, overharvesting, overgrazing, and related carbon release and African citizens would need 5 planets in pursuit of economic growth and insatiable consumption rates of both them. The reduction of poverty, grossly saturated by environmental and social impacts are included in GDP. The world is more equal, reinforced by neoliberal economics and historical roots of these inequalities come from the expansion and imperial conquest, and there are sustainable ways for the well-being. No, abandoning sustainable growth and shorter workweek, CPI, minimum wage, the capitalist power structures that threaten to destroy the planet. If not challenged and devote negative to just an authentic grassroots move to the center of class only by exposing neoliberal thinking and governance can we achieve a sustainable form of service. Matthew Trick 13. There are no clear solutions on the re-examination of oppressive knowledge and systems of control and progress is synonymous with business and model business and profit and only obtainable through social and environmental cultural distraction. In terms of equality, solidarity, we can start to look for ultimate comprehensive progress will come from the imaginations of resisting imperial and capitalism, and to start by preserving communities that hold out against the capitalist infiltration. Egalitarian and grassroots movements are mass movements that rooted in compassion expose how cultural authority manipulated how comradeship to wage war on the poor of our own. It is a part of a global struggle without recognizing that we're hurting the people we strive to help and also hurting ourselves. And critique is a question of political imagination. Neoliberalism sustains itself by making single issue policy focus seem necessary. Their scholarship is a prior question, which means it also precludes the framework debate. It critiques the notion that we should have a government in the first place. Block 15. Prescription is a participation in politics scholarship issue. The descriptive practice made for political engagement, religious math, current frameworks of political prescription. Produces a reified notion of politics as something that's limited to political as an intellectual potential. When attempting to counter hedge, one needs to disrupt what is political, not accept the narrowly politics that a neolib tried to demarket and challenges one can misconstrue neolib to promote freedom. One must recognize that neolib has redefined social responsibility. One must refuse to place a false dichotomy between the economic and cultural sphere that allows the neolib to displace cultural concerns. Neolib means taking neolib seriously. The approach must recognize neolib is inherently imperial. Recognize the hegemonic status quo. Can't understand this house that more as demystification. Neolib does not paper over inequality. It justifies them. A critique should open up conversation and beyond the lie to refuse the academy to become a mere mimic of neoliberalism. The app. Democratic citizenship relies on colorblind forms of politics that promotes anti-Republican values and capable of dealing with race. Robkins 15. Republicanism assumes that we're equal before the law, that all particularisms can and should be start to suspect in general that the general will is always universal and always good. It's an abstract universal that undergirds the integration. The question is that whose privacy can be abstracted within the framework that is perfectly legitimate to talk about racism as a dysfunctional system, but not about racism itself. The point was to question the republic or to examine how its colonial history led to a particular configuration of racial relations and hold them accountable for this order of the world. The perpetuation of anti-blackness should lose them the debate. Yes, you have 4. Reification includes the constructive force of whiteness rendered itself invisible. Head to is all they are for the debate is something that is action guiding. And all of their arguments are predicated on the government sort of setting obligations for people, but this just begs the question of how the government decides to go about having particular ends and how citizens are sort of under those ends. And this is particularly clear in the case of the military or national service programs who can determine what those ends are and how much criticism can you have, how much can you fight against the system, which obviously is just a palliative and empowerment. Projects propagate a politics of self-interest and individualism over solidarity while avoiding political activism. Dimitrov, 16 individual projects echo neoliberalism because individuals are seldom given means to take these choices, become providers disregard context to create an illusion of power without the efforts to change existence to make equality. Also, there's a tendency of power projects to avoid political activism due to short-term cycle to promote social culture, a cherry picking where the organizations avoid to helping the neediest and to focus on people on their way up that puts the individuals and communities into competition and creates a just self-interest rather than solidarity. Volunteer agendas are also unable to structure political change necessary to solve. And also, all of their impacts are predicated on them. Also, all of our K arguments interact with the what is it? We'll do more detail in the 2&R, but they're all case defense to them, so don't let them say that we dropped the case.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
What does it look like to have a reinvestment in the collective goodwill?
Okay, several arguments. So the alternative of the critique is sort of twofold. First, it's sort of a reorientation away from neoliberalism in terms of scholarship and the way that we view and conceptualize politics, the world, class relations, how oppression functions, things like that. The second one.
After the alt, how do we conceptualize like scholarships and politics?
Okay, so our argument is that the alt is a starting point, and we sort of critique the notion of your question that to have a concrete policy where we're like, we do X and then Y and then Z,
okay, that's
sort
fine
of
that
shuts down movements from the get-go.
Okay, so reinvesting in the collective goodwill is going to shut down movements from the get-go.
So the collective goodwill stuff, I'm not quite sure where you're drawing that from, but the Matthew Trinskart talks about sort of an authentic grassroots movement that's centered on class. It has sort of this solidarity portion of it, and it's also like a critical, like pedagogical reorientation.
Okay, so what's your alt word for word?
It's the text of the Matthew Trinskart card. Vote negative to endorse an authentic grassroots movement centered on class.
Cool. Okay, so you're like.
I don't think the alt text is.
How does the nature of service change in the world of the alt?
What do you mean by that?
Okay, so you talk about how like the service programs themselves are neoliberal. So how do these change in the world of the alt?
So our argument is that the way that the AF goes about doing service and their sort of conception of what it means to be like a good citizen and things like that are the ones that are inherently neoliberal. If you're talking about sort of the end point of the alt, obviously there's no endorsement of service projects the way that the 1NC does it in the 1NC. So
okay,
we're like
so
is there
service? Is there service in the world of the alt?
We're pretty particular to the AF plan, so we're like something like AmeriCorps is probably bad. Like we read like a link.
Okay, so is this like an actual like implementable alt, or is it just like a mindset shift alt?
What does that mean? What do you mean an implementable alt? I think a grassroots movement is something pretty material, but I don't know what you mean by implement. If you're saying
okay,
are you advocating for
a mindset shift?
What does that mean though? Like I don't understand what a mindset shift is.
Okay, that's fine. Let's talk about okay, so let's talk about on case. You talk about how like empowerment is going to propagate self-interested individuals and not have political activism. How does that interact with the entire first contention, which specifically talks about how this has caused like political activism within communities?
Okay, cool. So lots of arguments. So the critique links also interact with this, but I'll just talk about the specific part. So it talks about the way that individual projects feed into neoliberalist mindset, where it's like the individual versus the world, and they are sort of the messiah that can save the world, and that because they served for 2 years, they have solved poverty, oppression, racism.
One other question. In the world of the neg, do you advocate like for a world of a government?
What is it like? What do you mean?
Like, does the state still exist?
Does the state still exist in the world of the alt? Like, not the way that the AF conceptualizes the state.
Okay. I'll start running prep now. the order is going to be framing case K. Is everybody ready? First on the framework, extend that we form a government in order to ensure security from the state of nature, which requires trade-offs. This is specific to the United States because we are in a government, which means that we have left the state of nature in order to secure this security, which equals like trade-offs. And then on her card, that democratic citizenship results in colorblindness, especially when dealing with race. This card is not specific to democratic citizenship. This card does not take into account that the AF is fostering critical citizenship. You have to look to the fact that critical citizenship is being fostered in order so that we can critique the oppressive policies of the state. She doesn't know we're going to engaging with this at all. And then she says that this perpetuates anti-blackness, but as the affirmative is offering the only mechanism as to how to critique anti-blackness. Her K cannot do that. All she says is that we have to endorse grassroots movement, does not give a mechanism on actually how we're going to do that or what the state's going to look like after we do that. She doesn't explain any solvency, but now critical citizenship has historically fostered changes within the community. You can look to the first contention. And then she is questioning how the government is going to set these ends, but in the social contract, this is my framework is specific in how it talks about how these rights trade off with obligations. You have obligations and rights. There are equal obligations and rights of both the citizens and the governments. This is extremely clear. She just doesn't interact with it at all. It also talks about how making these obligations compulsory increases the amount of importance to it, and I'd say it's pretty important to like combat oppressive policies of the governments, especially with things like anti-blackness. And then down on her empowerment, property self-interested, she does not interact at all with my first intention evidence that talks about specifically in Vista and AmeriCorps that when they engaged in this national service, they went back to the communities and actually enacted change. This completely takes out her argument about how because it's like neoliberal, then change isn't going to happen. Hers is hypothetical, prefer my evidence. So you're going to be extending the BASA forecast to talk about national service increases critical citizenship, which increases civil participation. This is key to challenging the oppressive policies that she's talking about. She doesn't give any way that you can actually do that. And down in contention 2, this is extremely important. Extend that IV-14 retard, which talks about how currently lower income minorities are disproportionately driven into the military, which causes casualties. This means that the nature of service is racist as it is right now. Her all does nothing to solve that, and she completely dropped in the case. So this is going to outweigh, because that means that a specific group of people are being marginalized, and we have to look to the AF in order to solve that. She does nothing for it. And then on the third contention, extend that this is going to break down sociological divide. This is the ex-Nazi card. This means that whenever you're forced to interact with people that you normally wouldn't force with, that makes empathy and it makes better policy making, which is going to solve for things like neoliberalism. Now let's go to the K. So first she talks about how like the conceptions of citizens like necessitates non-citizens, but she has a government. She still has the government alternative, so citizens still exist. So she's still like linking into her own K. And then she says that the government sells the government sells service to the highest bidder. This is going to cause like inequality, but this is literally a reason to the AF. Whenever you have compulsory national service, it's going to be an equalizer, and it's not going to have like neoliberal ideas, because people are not going to be competing for service when you institute compulsory national service. And then she talks about how we have to reinvest in the collective goodwill, and how the K is going to outweigh, but there's no like way and mechanism to do this. Also, neoliberalism is key to solving environmental crisis. Environmental cooperation and economic development is critical to 2000. The nature of the environmental crisis, the most serious environmental problems result in depletion, destruction of global ecology, climate change, ozone depletion, loss of species and habitats. No one can solve this without substantial economic development, intense international cooperation of the myriad of international problems, persistent poverty, may turn out to be the most advocating destruction. So we are the only ones that are going to be solving. Also, she does not solve the nature of service. Her literally has no solvency. We don't know what the state looks like after we just endorse grassroots movement. This obviously isn't working in the status quo. I'm the only one that provides like an actual mechanism.
5 minutes. Wait, did you take 5 or 4?
5.
Okay. I had a couple rounds that did 4, so I just checked.
I'm sorry.
No problem. The critique, sorry, and then the case. Is everyone good? Lawrence, you good? Okay. Neoliberalism is exhausting resources at an alarming rate. We would need 5 Earths at the rate we're consuming. There's no impact defense in the one AR, which means the case vastly outweighs their advantages. It causes massive inequalities, resource and trade wars, oppression, poverty, environmental degradation, and food scarcity. Independently turns and outweighs the case versus magnitude and cost of extinction because there's no more resources and there's never-ending war because of our drive for competition, and more resources puts us inevitably in conflict with other nations. It's the second, it also always on scope because it's globally, whereas the app only affects a few million of young people in the U.S. Second is that it turns their app because it is the root cause of all the inequalities that they talk about within the app that they try to create. It's also the root cause of sort of their, it's also the root cause of all of like their kind of like oppression impacts and things like that, because the reason why those exist is a faith in the state and letting the state arbiter those rights in the first place. And now the environmental, the one case or the impact term. This card is ludicrous. There are several arguments against this versus the Gillespie card talks about the way that we have an endless need to consume different resources, which means that environmental degradation in the world of what you see is inevitable because we will run out of resources. There's not an infinite number of resources, which means that environmental degradation comes down. Second is that a faith in capitalism allows for us to ignore larger structural problems with our relationship to the environment, which means that we will just keep destroying it because we're like, oh, capitalism came up with this one way to capture carbon, or oh, capitalism did this one minor thing, which just allows degradation to go under the rug and will inevitably lead to degradation anyway. The third argument is that you should be highly suspect of their evidence is written by people with motives for profit. The reason why capitalism wants you to think is that they solve the environment is because people are like, oh, look, it's the reason why the system should maintain itself even more. So hold their evidence up under high scrutiny on the epistemology level. And the last argument is that this evidence is super old, whereas our evidence is literally from August, so it outweighs our recency. Now, the line by line, the alternative is an authentic bottom-up grassroots movement that centers on classism. It's twofold. One, it's an ethical refusal to engage in the logic of capital and reorient ourselves away from neoliberal scholarship and modes of politics. The second is that it's a mature collectivism that spills up into broader transnational movements versus capitalism. There's no all defense in the last speech, which means the alternative solves the root cause of the AFMAR harms and solves the case, because the reason why inequality exists right now is our need, is capitalism's need to create oppression, create in and out groups to maintain itself through structures of hierarchy. Their only argument against the alternative is that there's no mechanism. There are a couple of arguments of this. A critique of the alt is one that is sort of couched in this notion of progress, or that there's no foreseeable exact logic. There's no foreseeable exact logic, but we critique this notion because it is associated with economic drives, and a focus on the after is what allows neoliberalism to paralyze us into action and infects our scholarship. Focus on policy step by step allows us to co-opt the movement, which means that only the alternative can solve any of these problems, and their focus on the mechanism is just another link in the critique. That is the alternative card, but also the Blalock card, which both turn this notion. We don't need to have step-by-step politics, and that is actually harmful to the movement. It's better to have a starting point and work from there, but service organizations. They're based on technocratic business models, and they're funded by corporations. Who funds TFA? Goldman Sachs. Who funds AmeriCorps Vista? Literally the Rockefeller Center, the Rockefeller Foundation, which means that the motives that they have for doing certain things are all couched in economic incentives, but they also structure them like businesses where they put people with the lowest socioeconomic and racial minorities at the bottom of their corporate ladder and puts people on top, which just recreates more business models, which means that their logic is one that just pervades with neoliberalism. The last one is the last link is workfare, which turns the case. It says that notions of citizenship and saying that you have to work to be a productive citizen is one that always puts poor people at the bottom rungs, because it says that someone who is poor and cannot afford to work because they have to take care of their sick mother or something are not a valid citizen because they did not work for the neoliberal system. Become a citizen, which just recreates and enacts in massive repression. The framing issue for this round is that then all of this is case defense. It proves that their notion of citizenship is one that just reproduces massive inequality. You shouldn't let them weigh policy options if the notion of the one you see is one that was neoliberal and the one that is neoliberal. The only argument they're going to go for in the next speech is that they are an equalizer, but if we've proven that their logic and the structures that they use are ones that are fundamentally neoliberal, they do not get to leverage this. In the next speech, all the links are also case defense and prove that they are not sure they're going to go for this empirics argument, but we already made the epistemology on the Chen argument, which means that all of their arguments are just couched in neoliberal assumptions, and they have vested interest in saying stuff like that.
Okay, so I have 153 left. Okay, case is just framework, ACNC. Okay, is everybody ready? First on the framing, she critiques the notion of citizen, but she conceded that in the world of her alternatives, she still has a government, which means that she still has citizenship. She does not prove how she's going to do anything to actually change the notion of citizenship. I gave a mechanism as to like how to critique the oppressive policy of the government through critical citizenship, which has been used in the past. That's like a clear notion of what to vote on. She can't explain like what her alt does and how it's going to actually change the citizenship. and also extend that critical citizenship actually allows engagement with the system. She doesn't do anything to change the notion of citizens, so it's non-unique. Also, active mechanism, and she can explain with y'all. And so she says that extend the argument that because there is anti-blackness within the status quo, that's a reason to have critical citizenship. Because there are problems right now, that's a reason to have critical citizenship. She does not prove how her alternative is going to do anything to solve it. So you're going to be voting on a risk of solvency that right now in the status quo there are marginalizations of groups, and the affirmative is the best way to do this because she can actually crystallize and clarify how the world of her alt is going to work, and extend that within the social contract we have rights and obligations. So that is so we have an obligation to serve the country in order to decrease oppressive policies. And she said that on the empowerment argument, she said that people just do this to feel good about themselves, and it's motivation couched in economic and business models and things like that. But she doesn't actually engage with my evidence. Again, this is specifically talking about how people engaged in service organizations then went back to their community and spotted the inequalities and flaws to do that. She just makes a claim that they were doing it to feel good about themselves, but I say no, they were actually wanting to change something within their community. I have actual examples. Hers is just hypothetical. So this proves that even if you buy that these organizations are neoliberal, it proves that the outcome is still enacting change. Government policies are still being changed. And extend the I-14 coverage talks how I'm making national service less reach. She does nothing to solve this with her alternative. She makes this claim that that neoliberalism is the root cause to inequality, but doesn't give a warrant as to why it causes the inequality within the military. So let's go into the K really quick. So first, private organizations are going to be more liberal, which means that government intervention is important within these. Also, she has literally no case solvency. She can't even tell you what the world of y'all looks like afterwards. You're going to be voting on a risk of solvency because marginalization is happening right now. She makes this root cause argument no more, and then she says that you can't the notion of linking to the mechanism is a linking to the K, but she talks about outcomes too within the K, so that's a non-unique argument. So you're going to be voting on a risk of solvency that her alternative does nothing to actually change neoliberalism, and critical citizenship is the only way to actually combat oppressive policy making because I give you the mechanism, she doesn't. Good job. Good round.
starting with the app, I think like a lot of people who read philosophy apps just like need to more straight up just defend their philosophy as good against a lot of these critiques, sort of like shying away from some of this stuff and trying to like transition towards the more critical side of things in the 1AR doesn't seem like to be the way to go. If you're just gonna like read the social contract, just like the social contract's the way to go sort of thing. Like it solves everything that you say. I think you need to make more answers to the critique. So like minimally a permutation would be nice. I don't think there's a strong reason to prefer the impact turn that you decided to read. Like it seems a lot better to just instead spend that time allocating that towards the app is a good idea, permutation, some presses into the ability of the alternative to solve the affirmative, some presses into the ability of the alternative to solve itself, things like that. Because, I mean, if you just like have a straight up defense of the social contract and you win at that sort of good scholarship at the end of the debate, you're probably in a good spot. But I think you sort of stray away from what you need to be. So I'd recommend putting time into there. For the neg, I'd recommend engaging a little bit more with some of the like philosophical stuff that the app says, even if it's just in the turns case analysis at the top when you're just like, war is really bad. Like, why not just add in the sentence, like, it reverts us to the same state of nature that the Rev says that we're trying to get away from, or something like that. Just adding sort of more stuff that is directly interactive with the affirmative. Because one thing that, like, does get a bit annoying is sort of lining up every single thing that is in the 2NR with where the app has it, and I think you can just make it a lot easier by just doing more interactive work with the affirmative. So, like, stuff like that. I think the 1NC, like, should have spent more time, like, playing case defense. Like, I think you sort of get there with too little time, in my opinion. I would have like preferred to like not hear one of the K cards and instead have that as analytic time on the affirmative case and sort of pressing into the ability of the affirmative to do the things that it does, as well as like contesting sort of a philosophical basis of like why the app's framework is true. I feel like some of your extensions of the K and the 2NR were just too lengthy in my opinion. Like I don't understand why, I didn't like time it, but like the link part of the debate was like a good, probably minute. I don't know if I was like counting that like 45 seconds to a minute. I feel like most of that could have been like done shorter. Like maybe just pick a few of the links and go for them. But like, I'm not sure why it's necessary to extend like all of them. So yeah, those are my general comments.
Yeah, I would actually kind of echo a lot of what Lauren said. I think that the negative makes a lot of claims about sort of the scholarship of the app being neoliberal, but I think, like Lauren said, it would be really helpful. I think if you did more analysis on why the app, why the app, and more importantly, like the framing stuff that the app does, like links into the critique, because I think you rely on that as like a reason why she shouldn't get to weigh like the app against the negative at all. But I think I think if that is going to be as big of an argument for you as it is, it should have a little more explanation. If that makes sense. I think that Lawrence is also right on the app. I think that just like a robust defense of your framework, and I think that in the 1AR, if you sort of defend the framework more as a way to get out of a lot of the things that Indu is criticizing, right? And I think that if you sort of maybe perhaps even try to spin a lot of the links that Indu is trying to make to your case less as links to the notion of citizenship or the notion of like a social contract is good, and spin it more as just like criticisms of specific organizations in the US, right? So be like, your criticism is not with like the notion of service, rather with the notion of like AmeriCorps as like a shitty business. Right. Then like I think if you spin stuff like that, then I think that gives you the ability to say, look, your criticism is not that seems to open up to the possibility of like permutations that I think that you're just sort of like letting Indu kind of shut down with this whole like everything you say is like neoliberal right now, right? I think if you sort of say, look, no, some of my scholarship is not, some of my scholarship is like the notion of people, right. Like I think you could even make like a claim, Indu would probably disagree with it, but make a claim that the app is sort of the reinvestment that like she was talking about, right? That like forcing people to put in time in their communities is what a grassroots organization might look like. But I think that kind of stuff would sort of help you, would give you more options in the rebuttals. Whereas I think you kind of have like one or two right now.
Yeah, and like, I don't know, maybe like you have a clear point to disagree with the neg, so like maybe you disagree in the sort of link debate, like maybe you think the social contract is the way to get away from that sort of individualistic feeling that we all have. Like, we instead recognized like, we weren't individuals, we were social creatures, we had to like form a social contract. Or maybe you just like want to disagree that neoliberalism's bad and just be like, look, the social contract is an impact into your sort of conception of like what ethics are or something. But like, having a clear point of disagreement and just defending your app from that perspective, I think makes this debate a lot clearer for me.
Yeah.